Hi, my name is Laura Sharp-Wilson, and I am going to be presenting a couple of watercolor projects to you today. First, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a working artist, and I'm also the artist in residence at Hunstman Cancer Institute. I have a studio in Salt Lake City. I'm primarily a painter, but I also do different outdoor installation projects. I've done public art. I do sculpture. So I'm kind of all over the place. And I really love working with older adults. I feel like I've kind of found my niche there. I have a long career working with young people, so K through college, but I've found that this is really my calling. I'll tell you a little bit more about my personal art practice. I am represented by a gallery in New York that's called Mackenzie Fine Art, and I've been showing with them for about 10 years. I just had a solo show just right before COVID. My exhibition was actually cut short by 2 weeks. So that was a little frustrating, but in the grand scheme of things, it was pretty understandable and manageable. One of my favorite things I've ever done is I did a public art project through the Salt Lake Arts Council, and I designed and sort of oversaw the installation of a terrazzo floor at the Eccles Theater right here in downtown Salt Lake. And the process of doing that, I think, made me feel even more connected to Salt Lake City, and it was such a thrill to get to see my artwork in this beautiful new building, beautiful new performing art space. So that was a really special experience. I guess I also wanted to share with you that I just finished a 3-week workshop with an organization in New York called the Creative Center for Aging. And I've been learning a lot about working with older adults, working with people that have Alzheimer's, people that are living in nursing homes. And I'm really excited to start using those tools and teaching an even bigger swath of our community. So that's something I'm really looking forward to. I believe that everybody is an artist. And part of the reason I feel that way is because when I was a child, I was so drawn to making art, and I just felt like it really helped me grow and cope with difficulties in life. And I think it's a really important tool for all of us. And any art project can be made very simple or very complicated, depending on really how long you want to work on it. And the thing about making art is, yes, it is about your end product, but it's also about the experience of making the artwork. And I think it's important for all of us to have these creative experiences in our life. So maybe it's visual art, maybe it's music, maybe it's movement. These are incredibly important things to the human condition. And when you make art, you don't have to sell it, you don't have to show it to anybody. It's something that is just part of your heart and your brain and your presence in the world. And I really want to encourage people. I want to encourage everybody to be doing this. And it's a way to make you more hopeful, meditative, solid person in the world, and really just have some faith in yourself and your humanness. So just some things to think about. So I want to show you the materials that we're going to be using today. So watercolors I find to be a very versatile material. You really don't need to have any technical watercolor training. I think sometimes people think that you have to have technical chops for using watercolor, and you don't. You can really just jump in and use them. And what I have today is I have watercolor paper, brushes, jar of water. I always like to have some paper towels or like a dish towel that you can blot your paper and your brushes with. And then the other thing you'll want to have is like a pad of watercolor paper, and you can buy a relatively inexpensive pad of watercolor paper, and you just rip the sheets off. This is something I try to always have handy, like if I want to make cards for people, if I have a project idea. You also might want to have just super inexpensive, just like copy paper or newsprint, if you want to just work out some ideas and not waste the more expensive watercolor paper. And then as far as watercolors go, this is a double set, but you don't even need all that because you can really layer and mix on the paper or like on a tray, or if you want to take a plastic plate, you could mix colors. So you could have a super basic set. And sometimes I just like the student grade, like the Prang, P-R-A-N-G sets of watercolors, because they're kind of moist, so you can really kind of get in there and get like darker pigmentation, or if you add more water, you can get a lighter pigmentation. All these things are personal, so it's good to kind of play with the watercolors and figure out what works for you, because what works for me isn't necessarily what's going to work for you. So make it your own. Find your voice with the watercolor. All right, so we've got water, and then you're also going to need brushes. So I like to have one brush that's kind of more of a medium, maybe a skinnier brush, and then you could even just take like a house paint brush and use that for your wide brush, like if you want to do a big wash. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy. And as far as the brushes go, you can just get like a student grade brush. Anything that's student grade is going to tend to be a little bit less expensive. So those are good things to use. And then the other thing you're going to need for the ladder project is a glue stick. So sometimes people just have these, but these are pretty inexpensive. I think you can get one for like 70 cents. So any art supply you can get for under $1 is always a fabulous thing. So I think that's about it on the materials. I wanted to share with you the kit that you're going to be getting for this project. So it's going to include a pad of the watercolor paper, a set of watercolors, which I think is going to have about 8 colors in it. And just always remember, if you don't have exactly the color that you want to use, you can always mix colors. So don't be scared to do that. And you could even do like a little test where you're, taking the blue and the red and mixing them together and seeing how that comes out. And the way that you do that is, I just usually take the brush and dip it in the watercolor pan. These are called pans. And then I'll just put it like on the palette here, or if you have an extra plate, paper plate would work. Pie tins are also really good. And so I've got the blue down, and then I'm going to use some of this red here. And then I can just see what kind of color I get. And then just on my scrap here, and you could actually make a little test. So this is what the blue and the red do. But if I take some of the brown, mix it with the blue, get sort of a brownish blue. So that's kind of a fun exercise. That. You could even come up with a palette that you want to use for one of these projects. So lots of exploration to be done here. If you give yourself a little time, let yourself be creative, meditative, enjoy. So I wanted to talk a little bit about materials, and this watercolor project is meant to be really affordable. So beyond the kits that you're going to get, if you're in a position where you want to buy some more supplies, I just wanted to give you some pointers. Some places in Salt Lake to buy art supplies is Michael's is one. My favorite is Dick Blick, which used to be Utrecht. It's in Sugar House. And they quite often have really good sales. I think their prices are really good. So that would be a good place to get pan watercolor sets. You don't need to buy the super expensive stuff. Just go for the student grade. You don't need a ton of colors. But it's also really fun to just look around and see what your options are. So that's a really good place to go for your watercolor, pan sets, and then also your paper, lots of choices as well. Student grade, more expensive stuff, but really the student grade works well. And you can just, buy a pack. Probably this costs like $10, but it's got 30 sheets. And the other thing people forget is you make a painting, you're not in love with it, you can paint on the back side. And I do that all the time. I also will save any watercolor that I do if I don't like it, because you can always cut it up and use it for collage. You can work back into it. Sometimes artwork will look a lot different if you step away from it for a few days and you realize, oh, I could turn it into this, or I could add more to it. I could see, particularly with this painting, I like it how it is, but maybe I want to add more jellyfish. So don't be scared to work back into an artwork. And then also just about the glue stick, this is just a good thing. I mean, these are things to always have on hand. Set of watercolors, glue stick you can use for a lot of different things and super cheap. And then also just a basic watercolor pad. I think this is a good size. This is 9 by 12. But you could also go bigger. If you want to work bigger, this is a bigger size here. So, and that's really up to you, how you like to work. So I tend to work a little bit on the smaller side. Some people, they like to stretch out more. So that's just really a preference. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much what I have to share on materials. So now I'm going to show you how to make a ladder painting. So I came up, this is totally my idea, and I came up with it because I had all this scrap watercolor paper. Watercolor paper tends to be a little bit more expensive than, say, copy paper, even though you don't have to buy the most expensive watercolor paper. One thing I should explain to you about watercolor paper is that the sort of thickness of it is designated by pounds. So this watercolor paper, which is totally sufficient and has a nice weight to it, is 140 pounds. So if you go like down to 90 pounds, it's going to be a thinner paper. If you go up to like 300 pounds, it's going to be a really, really stiff paper like cardboard. And any of those are fine. The most important thing is that it's watercolor paper because it has a specific absorbency for a paint that you're utilizing a lot of water. So, if you try using watercolor paper on a copy paper, it's not going to absorb the same way, and it's not going to look as rich and beautiful. And it's honestly not going to be sort of as pleasurable to paint on. So to start this project, you're taking a piece of watercolor paper. This is something I've cut up already. And I'm just going to cut out a strip. And then I'm going to start cutting out shapes. So I try to keep the shapes somewhat simple. I don't worry about them being perfect at all because you're going to cut out a whole bunch of them. So here I've got a triangle. And then maybe I cut a little bit of a curve. Maybe your shapes are just squares. It's totally personal. And look at, this is a pretty quirky shape. So maybe you want quirky shapes. Maybe you want more strictly geometric shapes. Maybe you want a variety. Don't be scared to vary the size. They don't have to all be the same size. So This one is a little bit smaller. So I'm starting to get a nice array of shapes. You also want to have some scissors that are somewhat decent. I mean, they can be kitchen scissors, they can be sewing scissors. Just try to avoid like using some kitty scissors because they're going to be a little bit hard. So get yourself some just basic utilitarian all around good scissors. All right, so here I have a bunch of shapes and I'm ready to start painting these. I went ahead and painted a bunch already that you can see. So I would encourage you, just jump in there. You don't have to worry about them matching. You're just gonna make a whole bunch so you have a language of shapes, a variety of shapes. I'm just putting these out here so you can see. And most of mine are kind of pattern based. You can make some solid ones. If you want to include some recognizable objects, by all means. I did one that's a little foot. Here's an eye. So variety is always just really fun. And then you can match them up after you make a whole bunch. So I'm gonna show you how I go ahead and paint. Just gonna start out with some red. And I always, when I'm making art, I always try to say yes to myself. I think that it's really easy to say, no, that's not good before you even start. Or maybe you get an idea in your head. And I was thinking about this last night, like when I was painting this foot, I caught myself thinking, no, a foot is stupid. And I just said, no, don't say that to yourself. Say yes, yes, yes. And I went ahead and painted this foot. And you don't have to use it. You don't have to show it to anybody. You can just play. And I think, you know, play is such an important word when you're older. We think of play as a word that is used for younger people, but play is something we can do throughout our entire lives. And, you know, maybe you feel like you can't really do that in your work, in your schedule, in your sort of regular life, but here you can. So when you're being creative, you can play. And that's a really liberating, freeing feeling. So I've got my red on here and I'm just gonna start painting some stripes. Super easy, painting stripes, right? And then maybe I do another set of stripes on top. So this is really easy, but you get a lot of bang for your buck. So you get this sort of rich grid of color. Maybe I will make one that is just solid purple. So I'm gonna have a solid purple triangle. Another thing that you can do with watercolor is you can blot it. So I've got this purple here, and maybe I decide I want it to be a little bit lighter. So you can just put a paper towel right on top of that, and I get a lighter purple. Maybe I put some of that same color polka dots on top of that light purple. That is one thing that sometimes people are prone to do, is just leave a lot of white, which you certainly can do, but also think about in some of these shapes that you're just covering that entire white surface. I don't know if you've ever noticed, like when children make artwork, a lot of times they'll, you know, draw the house or a figure and then they leave the whole background white. And I've always had a real challenge working with children, trying to get them to fill in that white space. So, but we're fearless, we're adults, we're older, we're fearless. Just jump right in there. All right, so this one I'm making some green polka dots, and I'm gonna let that dry a little bit and then I'm gonna paint on top of it. So that's another thing to think about, is I can paint on top of wet or I can let it dry. And you know, this is something, if you just start playing with the watercolor, exploring, experimenting, you're gonna come across all these things. There is not one way to work with watercolor, and I think that's part of why it's so popular and people are so drawn to it, is you can do a lot of layering, you can make the color more opaque, you can make it more transparent. All right, so we're gonna dry that one, and then let's try one where we are using wet and wet. So I'm gonna paint a background on this very irregular shape with the pink. And then let's see what happens if I use the black and paint on top of it. So you get more of a blurry effect. And as you can see, this is pretty fun and yummy. You could just sit and do this all day. So it's like your brain just goes into a different place, you know? It's like you're feeling more liberated. You're feeling more free because there's no agenda. There's nothing that like I have to do. And I think that's really where the sort of wellness and healing component comes in. All right, what else should we paint? Let me do something representational. So I decided I'm gonna do a hand. And I'm not gonna worry about it being a perfect hand. I'm just gonna do it. So getting that thumb in. And it's kind of a silly hand. So here we go. Here we have a hand. And then maybe I'll fill it in with some orange. And it's kind of messy, but I really don't care. I don't have to show this to anybody. All right, so there I've got my orange hand. One thing that I love to paint is flowers. So I'm gonna do a flower. Let me see, this is kind of my bigger piece. I think sometimes people feel like they have to look at a picture in order to create artwork, but you don't. You have so much going on in your brain. There is so much information you've retained. You've looked at flowers so many times. You've looked at polka dots so many times. So just trust your brain to give you that information. Not that you can't look at an image. I mean, that's another option. But I think that's where people tend to go. So try the option of not looking at a reference image. Or if you do, just make it different and don't worry about it looking exactly like what you see. And then I'm just kind of doing a quick little background. I'm not getting too close to the edge because I don't want this one to blur. So I'm just leaving a little bit of a white outline there. So that's another thing you can do. And you know, the reason I know how to do this is just because I figured it out. I just sat down with watercolors and, you know, made cards for people or made a painting. Nobody like trained me in watercolor. And you know what that means? It means you can do it too. Because I wasn't born knowing how to do this. I just sat down and did it. So, Oh, let's try, this is the one that I let dry. So this is the green polka dots. So I'm gonna try putting, I think I'll do more polka dots. So these are just gonna be outlined ones. So this is gonna show you how you can layer on top. So because I just set this aside and let it dry, now I can get like a clean, non-blurry line on top. So here is that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just fill these ones in too, so we have a massive array of these crazy painted shapes. And if you make a bunch of these are really fun to give people. They're not like a traditional card. People don't really expect them. So I made a ton of these and gave them to people. And I'll show you how you can hang them on the wall. Kind of painting some X's. So another thing you can do is, while you're working on these, you can stop and look what you have and see what else you might need to fill in. So do I have enough variety? Do I want to have more that are just solid colors? Do I need more stripes? Because I think visually it's more interesting if you had different things going on. So like this one that I finished, you know, we've got stripes, we've got a sort of woven pattern, we have this kind of Target theme. I have this little sunrise on top, and I didn't plan this. I just made a variety of shapes, and then kind of like making a puzzle, I just mixed everything around to see what would look the best together, and we'll go through that process. I'm gonna do some more leaf shapes. One thing you have to be careful of is you can get pretty obsessed with this and have a hard time stopping. So. And you know, the watercolor's very forgiving. So if you don't like what you have, you can just paint on top of it, turn it into something else. I think I need another solid. What color haven't I used? Let me see. Some brown. That's another thing to think about too is, you know, maybe your favorite colors are blues and greens. Don't really love brown, but go ahead and give brown a shot. Or mix it in with the blues and greens. Be adventurous. You know, we can't all climb Mount Everest, but this we can do, right? All right, I'm gonna leave that one solid. I'm gonna add some more X's. I'm letting this be blurry and messy. And you know, that's something else too. Like, I've been making art my entire life. I sell my artwork, but I have a tendency to be really, really tidy. And sometimes I have to say to myself, even though I have this very established creative practice, like, I have to say, Laura, let yourself be messy. Because if you have the messiness with the tidiness in one artwork, that can be a very interesting thing to look at. All right, so we've got that, and what should I do on this brown? Maybe I'll make some little red hearts. And after I do these, I'm going to add some black dots. I think something that's very cool about this project is it allows for all these little paintings. It's not one artwork. And dots are a great thing to do because you can create a vibrant background by just painting these little dots. I don't know if anybody's ever seen Aboriginal artwork from Australia, but in that tradition, they use dots to create the shapes. And quite often, the artists are depicting dreams. And so they do end up having this very ethereal quality because of that sort of pulsating dot texture. Alrighty, so I've got a ton painted. I think I'm gonna make a background on my crazy hand. And then I will show you how to put these together. Another thing to think about is your mood. So if you're feeling very patient and you have some time to work on this, make very patient, careful artwork. If you don't have a ton of time and maybe you're feeling a little frenetic, let that come out. You know, it's all good. All right, so we've got a ton of shapes, and I'm gonna go ahead and figure out how I want to place them. So I'm gonna make a bunch of what I call ladders. So I'm just gonna line them up and see what works well together. I try to arrange them with a variety of color, a variety of shape, so that when you look at the ladder, you know, your eye is getting different information in every shape. And that's what creates the visual interest. You could even have like two side by side. Sometimes I like to take like a little one that's kind of a dangle at the bottom. And I find this process to be fun. It's like, oh, this looks good together. Oh, that's kind of cool. I put these two triangles together. And you can make some of them rather long. All right, so I love this one. Trying to find the right shapes to go with my foot. And I try to use all of my shapes. you'll find you get kind of all these different sort of themes and color relationships. I think that's why I like doing this. I'm going to make some long ones. All right, so I've got 4 set up, and you can see I've made these a little bit longer than this one. Well, this one's kind of the same. Okay, so this is the arrangement that I've selected. So then what I'm going to do, I've got them laid out on the table. I'm going to just flip them. So they're still in the same arrangement, but I'm just flipping to the back side. And I leave, it's probably about 1/4 of an inch of space. It doesn't have to be exact, but more or less 1/4 of an inch between the pieces. Get my triangles fit together. All right, so I've got them flipped, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut out a strip of this scrap watercolor paper. And this can also be about 1/4 of an inch thick. And then I'm going to cut pieces that are about 1/2 an inch long. Sometimes what I do is I just fold the piece in half and then I cut it, and then I know that I have 2 pieces that are like the same size, and then I just keep doing that so I get a size consistency. So then these pieces are about 1/2 an inch, 3/4 of an inch. So here I have these little strips of paper, and we're just going to go ahead and glue them on the back. Using the glue stick. Glue sticks are nice because they're not too messy, they're inexpensive, and they're portable. And you can use them for a lot of paper projects. I love that when you're teaching children art, they think you can use tape or glue sticks on anything. So like they'll try to tape rocks together. That does not work. Or they'll try to glue stick rocks together. And then sometimes if I have wider pieces, I'll put the tabs on both corners. So that's what I'm going to do on this one. And since these pieces of paper are fairly irregular, we don't have to worry about it being perfect. And I'm just going to glue this one so you can see how it works. And then this is wider, so I need the 2 pieces. So I'm folding in half again. Yeah, see, these are all these little tricks you invent for yourself. Nobody taught me to do this. I just figured it out. I guess these things can be somewhat intuitive. And then this is just a skinny one, so I just need one little strip. And you could even go ahead and just cut out a ton of these little strips of paper and then just go ahead and glue all of them after you've cut out all the little strips. Just cut them out the same size. All right, so almost done. And you can put the glue either on the strip or on the back of the shape. All right, so here we have it. So here is my ladder painting. Really beautiful and colorful, something that you can hang on the wall. So I'm going to show you how to make a little hanging device. So again, I just take a strip of paper, and you can see I did that on this one. And you can either tape or glue it. So I've got, you're going to want a little bit of a longer strip. So this is more like maybe 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches. And I just kind of make this little loop. Just so if you want to hang it on a nail, you can. Actually, this needs to be a little shorter because this is a small piece at the top. And I'm just going to put glue on the ends. You could also just tape a little piece of string, but I thought I would keep the materials basic. Yeah, so see, I just push it so there's a little bit of a sort of loop there that could go on a nail. Sometimes you have to hold the glue for a little bit, especially when you're doing something that's not totally flat. So I'm holding the glue with my fingers till it stays. And there you go, here's your loop. You could hang it on the wall. So it's actually not a bad idea for a holiday gift if you're not wanting to spend money right now. I think this would be a great thing to do. And like I said, I've sent this to people. It's kind of like a very, very fancy card that is made with lots of love, soul, creativity. So this was really fun to show you. So the other art project that we have using watercolors is jellyfish watercolor paintings. And I came up with this idea because I heard an interview with a scientist and author who had written a book about jellyfish. And it just popped in my head that would be the most fabulous subject matter for watercolor painting. And you get a very immersive feel with these. I think it's very meditative. You can do it quickly, you can do it slowly, you can work back into it. So let's talk about what you'll need and what the approach is. So you're going to need your watercolors, brushes. Usually I like to have a big wash brush, and you can really just use a house painting brush. And then I like to have kind of a medium brush and a smaller brush that's good for line work. So you don't need a ton of brushes, just a little variety in width. And you're going to need watercolor paper, and you can work with a smaller paper or a larger paper. I usually encourage people to think about how they like to work. If you like to really kind of stretch out, maybe a bigger type of paper is good. Or if you like to kind of just focus and make something more intimate. Like you can see, the project works with these different sizes, but this one does tend to be a little bit tighter on a smaller piece. And you know, you're really thinking about the size of the human body and sort of the stretch of your arms, your hand. And so automatically when you get to something bigger, it's gonna allow for more movement. So that's something interesting to think about. All right, so we've got brushes, water, watercolors, and then our paper. And then I also like to have either some paper towels or just like an old towel or dish rag that you can use to blot your paper and your brushes. So let's go ahead and get started. One thing I really love about the jellyfish watercolor paintings is the shape of the jellyfish is super, super simple. And this is just a sketch beginning of one of the jellyfish paintings. And you can see we're really just talking about this round or oval shape, and then the tendrils, the legs of the jellyfish. And so you can really break it down to those two simple forms. With this project, I do like to have some reference material. So we've got some color copies of jellyfish swimming. Here's a single jellyfish. And again, you see this round body and then the tendrils that come from that body. And so some of the tendrils, they flow, and then some of them are kind of more crinkly. So you could do one or the other or both. Some more jellyfish pictures, the school of jellyfish. So that's another thing you can think about. You know, maybe there's some jellyfish that are more in the background, some are more in the front. You can think about, do I paint 2 jellyfish? Do I paint 1, or do I paint a multitude? And your color as well. A lot of these images I have are blue and orange, some brown. But you don't necessarily have to do that. Maybe you decide I want to make my jellyfish green with a red background. Then I also have another reference, and this is an illustrator from the 1800s, Ernest Haeckel. And so he did all these very detailed illustrations of different botanical forms and sea creatures, sea life, and here's his jellyfish. And I think you just get a nice feel of the sort of flow, how he utilizes the round body, the wiggly legs, the movement. And these are very different because they're rendered in a very illustrative way where he's really trying to delineate all the parts of the jellyfish. It's more of a scientific approach, but it's fun to see the different ways that artists have depicted jellyfish and on the cover. And then you can also go to the Monterey Bay Aquarium website, and if you just go to montereybayaquarium.org, you will immediately get to their jellyfish cam, which is on the homepage of the website, and they stream the jellyfish at the aquarium all day long. And so that's an excellent resource. It's nice to have some still images, but it's also just nice to watch those. It's very meditative, mesmerizing, and I think it'll start to give you a really nice feel for jellyfish and will inform your painting process. So you don't necessarily have to copy it, but you can just use that as information that you have in your head. So there's 2 ways that I tell people they can start to work on this. So one is to just go ahead, I'm going to have my reference here, and draw some forms. Sometimes people like to draw with paper, draw with pencil first, the forms, which is fine, but I would also like you to try to just jump in there. So I'm taking my medium brush and I'm going to just dip it in some blue, and I'm looking at these reference pictures, and I'm not trying to copy it exactly, but here I have, voila, a jellyfish body. And then maybe I do another jellyfish, and maybe this one's from a little bit of a different vantage point, so you're seeing the full circle of the body. And then I'm gonna go ahead and do the legs. So it's nothing exact. I'm not trying to copy it. I'm just kind of getting that feel of the jellyfish. And then here's some of those crinkly legs. So I'm starting to have this drawn already. And it's like if I don't love this, I can paint over it. I can flip to the other side. We don't have to show this to anybody. This can just be about connecting with yourself and your creativity. So, see, I'm looking a little bit at this, but I'm not like, oh, trying to copy it exactly. All right, so that's one way that you can start. And then another way you can start, this is more of a traditional watercolor technique, which I don't, you know, those are great tools, but you don't necessarily need that. I don't want you to be inhibited. I just want you to enjoy yourself. So what I'm doing is I'm going ahead and I'm just putting a coat of water on the watercolor paper, and this just makes the absorption better for the pigment. So the pigment being your pan watercolor. And then I'm gonna dip the brush in the blue. I'm just sticking with that traditional watery background. And then maybe I decide, I want this blue to be a little bit more green. So I'm gonna add some green. This is why people love watercolor so much, because it really is forgiving. And you can just play and blend and mess. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw some bubbles. So I'm going into that blue again, and this is just making a background. So here we started with our line work, getting those jellyfish in right away. And then with this one, we're doing the opposite. We're creating our background. And just remember, if you're going to be painting wet into wet, you automatically are going to get a more watery feel. You can really see the difference here. So I just did watercolor on dry paper, so I automatically get a clean line. With this, I'm getting more of a blurry line. And neither is better or worse, they just have a different effect. So, and I mean, I don't see these circular bubbles in these photographs, but I just decided I wanted that. So I'm gonna let this one dry a little bit, and then we can go back to working on this. So let's see what happens. I'm gonna go ahead and do some green on top of this. So maybe I'm not sticking with the exact coloring I see in the photographs, but I like this sort of mermaid sea green. I do notice one thing about myself: when I start creating, I can just feel my blood pressure go down. I just feel focused and calm. And that's why there is so much interest right now in creativity and wellness and aging, because being creative, working this way, really has an impact on your well-being. So you can see here, I'm still retaining that line that I originally did. So that's pretty cool. So that's why this is another great way of working. All right, so now I'm gonna start adding some of the orange I see in the jellyfish, and the paper's pretty wet. So I know that it's gonna end up being pretty washy. And I just mixed a little bit of yellow into this orange. I'm using a smaller brush. And this is cool to see, is that I get this blurry sort of edge right here. And if you look in this photograph, the quality of the jellyfish, it does have this blurry line right here. So I'm getting that automatically with the quality of the watercolor. I'm gonna make the legs a little bit more yellowy orange. A lot of the jellyfish, you see the sort of center membrane. I'm painting that right now. I'm going to use the smallest brush I have to get some line quality. Paper's still wet, so it's still going to be blurrier. Sort of adding this texture that I see in that jellyfish. So I've got a really good start going here with this one. And now I'm going to go back to my other larger paper, and I've got my background, so I'm going to start getting those jellyfish blocked in. Let's see, I think I want to use a little bit of a thicker brush. I'm just jumping into that orange. And once again, I'm not going to worry about this too much. I know the jellyfish, they've got a round body. They have these tentacles that are these flowing lines, and I'm just going to go for it. Maybe there's some yellow tentacles. And you can start to see that when I'm working on this bigger paper, I'm automatically starting to use my body more. You know, there's this term called action painting. So if you know the artist Jackson Pollock, he was considered to be an action painter because he literally used his whole body to make these big splashy paintings. And if you see a video of him, he's actually moving around the painting that's laid out on the floor. So that's something to think about. You can be an action painter. All right, so I've got this jellyfish. I think I'm gonna make maybe just one other one that's about well, maybe I'll do a couple that are much smaller, and they're gonna be in the background. So here we have some littler ones. Another thing to think about when you're using the paintbrush is if you kind of use the tip, you can get a little bit of a thinner line. If I use the whole body of that brush, so like this whole part, and kind of smush it down, I get a thicker line. So you can get a lot of different line quality with just one brush. You could even do a little bit of seaweed. That would be fun. And I don't have that in these pictures, but I can just make these sort of green wiggles that are seaweed. If you want to add more complexity. So, all right, so I think we've got a pretty good start here, and you can just keep working into these as the paper dries, so you can kind of start to see that the layers that get developed. It looks like on this one, I painted the jellyfish first, and then I went in with the background. You can see some bubbles here, even some blue sort of marks that go around the jellyfish that do start to suggest the water. So that's another consideration as well, is your water. And maybe I should demo that a little bit more to kind of show water movement around the jellyfish. And this one, I'm going to start suggesting a little bit more water. See, now this one's pretty wet. So I'm going to let that one dry before I work into it, because I've got enough blurry. And if I let that dry and then paint on top of it, like we did with the ladder paintings, I'm going to get some crisper line. And then I'm just going to do a little water effect on this one. So these really are our parts. We've got jellyfish body, legs, and then water to consider. Little bubble there. And this could even be almost done. I'm kind of digging this. It's got a little bit of an abstract quality. And then immediately when I start to work in a drier way where I'm getting clean line, it'll get less and less abstract. So, you know, the stopping point is up to you too. Like maybe this is where you stop. Maybe this is where you stop. So this is your voice. So these are important things that you allow yourself. So I hope everybody enjoys this. I really love this project. So it's been so wonderful to be able to share these watercolor projects with you. This has been a really difficult time for everybody, and I really think that making artwork can make a huge difference in your life. And I really hope that everybody's feeling like they can persevere, they're feeling strong, they're feeling like they can jump into some creativity to balance their lives out. And so it's just a really special opportunity for me, and to be able to share with you is so satisfying. And I just want everybody to stay safe, to stay strong, and believe in yourself. Bye.